Hi, everybody. I'm John Kraska, Executive Director for Every Library and the Every Library Institute. It's nice to be here with you for another in our series of training videos for the Utah State Library. This one is called Telling the Right Story. And what we're going to talk about today are several different aspects of marketing and communications, particularly around media, outreach, PR, and how to frame what you're doing for email and the web. I think it's an interesting topic, and I hope you do too. Every Library Institute. The training today is coming from our institute side, which is our 501c3 nonprofit. We work on public policy, tax policy, education policy. We do a lot of trainings like this, and we also spend a lot of time talking to the American public about libraries and librarians and the folks who work in public libraries, school library, academic libraries. I want to share with you today some of the things that we know and have learned about how to build and cultivate a media presence and to be able to tell the story that you want to have told about your library, about your staff and your board, about your mission, your vision, and your values. So in this one, we're going to talk again about effective communications, the web, PR, email, newsletters, etc. And I'm not as concerned in the beginning of the conversation around making more users. Many of these same techniques can be utilized in order to find folks, to bring them in, to get them to use the library more. But fundamentally, what we're looking to do with the conversations today is around building support and affinity and understanding, moving from that classic awareness into some sort of a relationship with the library. We'll talk a little bit about journalism and journalists. We'll talk a little bit about podcasts and producers. And we'll also touch on crisis communications as well. So I'm going to kill my video here so that we can see the whole screen. There we go. I've disappeared. And here we go. Marketing to build support, folks. It's, again, not just about getting people to use the place. It's about a whole new kind of affinity for what the library is and who the library workers are. The frame here is based on our frame for communications, for effective communications, for storytelling that has impact. Of choosing the right story is based on some insights that come from OCLC and the From Awareness to Funding study. OCLC back in 2008 and then again in 2018 confirmed a very important set of insights that nothing in their surveys of the American voting public matters as much as the perceptions that voters have of the librarian and the library as an institution. It doesn't matter about their user experience. It doesn't matter if they've been to the library since they themselves were children. It doesn't matter if they are Republicans or Democrats or left-handed people. It doesn't matter if they are educated or wealthy or own their own home. Gender doesn't matter. It's this perception that they have of the librarian and the library as an institution that drives a great deal of their decisions around taxes, around support, around affinity. Likewise, voters also see the library itself as a transformational force in the world. It is not the user's own experience necessarily. A lot of people use the library very casually, and that's not a problem. Now, the work that you do touches lives very dramatically, though. The casual user, in fact, there's a lot of people in your community who might not even have a library card. They might not come in, but they still see the institution and, by the transitive property, the people who work there as doing transformational work. And I want to make sure that the understanding of the image of the library and the librarians as a co-equal are front and center of our communications campaign and our work to tell the right kind of stories to folks. Because the right kind of story, generally speaking, is one that they would like to hear about the transformational things that you're doing rather than potentially the stories that you're looking to tell. Or we have to at least think through the stories that we're looking to tell to folks in a lens that is much more receptive to how they're wired to listen. Marketing to build use is a particular kind of marketing. There's going to be one slide on it in this entire presentation. That's this one. Yes, encouraging participation or uptake is marketing tomorrow. What's going to happen tomorrow at the library? Next week, 3 months from now, there's going to be a program. There's going to be a service that you want that you're going to try and market to somebody. You want people to come in and read something, whether it's ebooks or print books. You want them to use the place, to experience things there. And all of it is about utilization and either a point of need that people have, like I need this book now. I need this service that you're doing. I want this program. I want to be involved in something that's going on there. This point of need, point of want aspect of things is fantastic. And yet it is always limited to the fact that there's only a small inventory of people at any given moment in time who are qualified to attend a particular type of program or are interested in need of a particular service, are eligible to read that title. And you know as well as I do, when the book club hits, everybody suddenly wants to read that one title. You're like, why didn't they tell me before? But that thing's been sitting on the shelf for months. There's only a certain population that is eligible at any point for using a particular aspect of the library. There's a tremendous amount of folks who are available in your community who want to continue, who want to learn, perhaps as a user, sure, but the non-user, even those folks who don't have library cards, about what did you do yesterday? What did you do yesterday at the library to fulfill the value system of libraries, the mission that you're on, the vision that you have for the community? What did you do yesterday that is identifiable to me as somebody who doesn't need a particular service? In fact, I'm good enough at Excel that I could teach your class on Excel. I'm functionally literate enough that I could coach somebody on first language literacy acquisition skills. There but for the grace of God go I. I don't need that thing that you're doing. Yes, it's nice to come to the library and use your stuff once in a while or attend a program, but the transformational things don't happen to me personally. They happen to other people. Tell me what you did yesterday. Not just come to a program tomorrow, but what did you do yesterday that put my value system to work, the value system that you and I share, me as a resident, you as the library, or the common mission that we have to take care of our neighbors, or the vision that we have that's aligned with each other about where we should be going as a community. Again, this kind of marketing is not about making users. People will become users on their way to become supporters, but the support building that goes on, the messaging, of course, should name if you have the correct resource or not. Don't get me wrong, because if yesterday you were able to fulfill your mission, vision, and values because you had the right collection, the right staff, the right hours, that's wonderful. People who support you want to know that good money's going after good. But if yesterday you could not fully realize your value system, your mission, or your vision, you need to be able to tell people that in an honest way, in an open way, in a transparent way, because if you want that shortfall corrected, that's why you're building support. It's not just to have a bunch of people feel good about the library, it's to see how you can move your agenda forward. So marketing to build use, marketing to build support, and then within that matrix, public relations as a technique for reinforcing or changing perceptions. Users and non-users, marketing tomorrow to build use, marketing yesterday to build support, is the current position of the library a good position in the eyes of the public, in the eyes of your stakeholders, in the eyes of your elected officials and your funding partners? Or do we need to change the perception of the institution, the whole institution or your organization, because you're currently disconnected in some way from a right kind of story, a true story about what you are, who you are, what you believe? So I want to speak today mostly about this public relations component of it in order to help operationalize, yes, some of the marketing techniques that help you bring more people in tomorrow. I only said there's going to be one slide. I probably want to talk about it a couple of times, but also mainly to how did you do things yesterday and what do you need in order to do it right? Awareness building is not PR. Public relations is not about awareness building. It's about either reinforcing a perception of the library or changing a perception of the library. Awareness building is an aspect of it. It's an early component of it, but it's certainly not the whole process. Advertising, folks, is not PR either. Advertising is advertising. You're not going to see slides in here about how to construct a Canva, image. There's other people who are going to teach you that later on in the series. Advertising is not the discussion point here. It's the active voice that supports or corrects. It encourages or nudges how people perceive, think, feel, believe about you. It starts with what your goals are. Not, again, to build use necessarily, though that could be one of your goals. Like if your entire PR campaign is, okay, folks, we are a little light right now on the number of people who attend things or use us or come in. Maybe this is a post-COVID situation where your necessary closures made it difficult for people to remain with you, or maybe human behavior has changed so much during COVID that you have to reestablish some of those patterns of use. If that's your PR goal, that's fantastic, but there's a lot of other potential goals in terms of your support matrix where people have more affinity for you. Your elected officials are more likely to agree with you and support you. Your donor class is much more interested in what you're doing and therefore much closer aligned with their donor dollars. If your PR goals are about being better liked, more appreciated, being seen as an expert, because you truly are the only expert in your town, by the way, on librarianship. Do you want to be at a new table with new funders, with new partners? Do you want to see better funding? I don't know what your whole matrix is right now, but these kinds of public relations goals, your communications goals, are legitimate places to start this conversation. Certainly, it could be about use building, but fundamentally, is it about your position in the community vis-a-vis your mission, vision, and values? Are they properly funded? Are you enabled to do what you're supposed to be doing as a library? I'm going to talk a little bit about social proofs here. The concept of social proofs is a sort of a marketing and sociological phenomena that we sometimes get tripped up on in libraries. We get tripped up on social proofs. Well, social proofs fundamentally are a component of decision making, of heuristics, where decision making is validated, that a credible decision is possible to be arrived at because of the behavior of others. We look at it as endorsements oftentimes, but social proofs have this general framework around them where it is, in a certain respect, the wisdom of the crowd. It is some peer pressure. It is a validator that is external to the institution, your own institution, or it is a validation that comes from inside based on some competencies. Social proofs are not telling stories about somebody that you helped. Social proofs are having validators who support either the reinforcement of the messaging that you want to see out in the world, or help encourage a correction of the messaging that you want to see out in the world about the library. These social proofs around endorsements, social proofs which demonstrate the right decision versus a wrong decision. Again, this is a heuristics conversation, it's a decision-making conversation. Social proofs come from 5 different places, and none of them are, generally speaking, the storytelling that we do about somebody other than us. Social proofs come in from experts, folks who can validate the work that the library is doing, the competency of the institution, the competency of the staff, the experts who can say that the library as an institution, the folks who work there are doing the right thing correctly in ways that are effective and efficient. And the expert in terms of your the expert in terms of your PR work is an extraordinarily important moment. Finding someone who will not be a spokesperson for you. I'm going to get to what spokespeople look like from inside the library, but to be an external third-party validator who have the credibility in the community to say the library and what the library is espousing is true. There's another type of social proof, which is a celebrity. We sometimes hear in social media terms about influencers. Celebrity has all different sorts of characteristics based on the size of the community, the demographics of the community that you're trying, a sub-community that you're trying to affect with your PR messaging. A celebrity is oftentimes not just a noted author or a movie star or a TV star, but it's people who have notoriety and respect in your community. Your PR strategy, your marketing to build support strategy benefits greatly from having a person or even you can use celebrity like a team. Sports does actually confer celebrity not just amongst individual players, but that whole team kind of approach. Your PR benefits greatly when you have that outside validator that is an attractive, admired individual. Credible is one thing, admired is another. Users. We tend to tell stories about how we have done something for someone. We helped Johnny learn how to read. Therefore, Johnny went to high school and he went to college, and now Johnny is very successful. Great. We helped several people in an Excel class. Now they can get a job. Wonderful. We talk about them, but the user has a real opportunity to provide testimony as opposed to us describing an experience. Users are often not solicited properly. They are used as an object in a lot of marketing. They are used as an example rather than for what they truly are, which is a validator of the credibility, the experience, the impact, the efficacy of what you're trying to accomplish. The actual user also should be chosen in order to have enough similarity to the audience that you're trying to talk to, in order for the validation to take place within a peer group. Crowds. Crowds are looked at in social proof contexts around public relations and around marketing, sometimes as literally crowds. You want a bunch of folks showing up, and there's a line out the door. Oh, that must be a great place. Oh, there's a million kids at the fairy tale ball. Wonderful. What a great experience that was. Crowds are important to be able to demonstrate that you have a large scale endorsement and a lot of validators. But there's another aspect of crowds that I think is important for institutions like libraries to take into account, which is something as prosaic as survey results, as polling, as post program what do you call them? The measures that matter kinds of things, the project outcome, the did you learn something at this event? Crowds in social media are actually likes. They're little stars on things. They're upvotes. The crowd as a validator for the library, if I was you, if I can look at it like this from a crowd perspective, I'd want to make sure that my library has a pretty good Yelp review and a Google review, because those are places where larger disaggregated groups validate the worth, the impact, the enjoyment of a place like the library. And then, of course, there's the friends, which is not directly the friends of the library, but that is your first big friend. The personal trust environment, you can't engineer social proofs around friend-to-friend, peer group networking, but you can build structures in place for your marketing so that people can help you tell your right story in low barrier ways. Do you make it possible for people to share about you easily on social media? Do you make it possible for people to refer about you in those third-party apps like mapping and review services? Do you make it low barrier that people can invite others to participate in the activities that you're doing? Now, none of this is about writing a press release yet, but all of these are potentially who would you put in the press release. None of these social proofs are about hosting a press conference or about writing for the web or for email. These are all folks who should be components of, in different differentiated ways, be potential components of just demonstrating that your vision, your mission, and your value system is being put to work in the world. Social proofs are not you, though. So all those are external validators, experts and crowds and friends and users even. The successful PR work that I'm talking about, successful public relations that either reinforces the perspective of the or the image of the library, or corrects the image of the library out in the world. Successful public relations work ensures that it's you, your institution, and your expertise that are in the story. Any external validator, any social proof, anyone who vouches for you, those constituents, decision makers, stakeholders, grant makers, and donors, yes, they want to hear from somebody else about you, but they need to hear from you directly. We have a problem in library marketing and in library advocacy generally around this country where we expect somebody else to tell the story for us. That we feel that we've succeeded if somebody other than us vouches for us. And yet that's only a component of reinforcing the way decision making should go. This is a much more effective communication technique in marketing when you try and shape perceptions or reinforce perceptions is to tell your own story. And therefore, your own story is the right story that needs to be told. All right, I'm going to talk for 2 or 3 slides about how people are wired to listen. Listening is a skill, yes, but that's only when you're in dialogue and discussion. When you're on the receiving end of a marketing message or a marketing technique, when you're engaged with a public relations campaign in order to either reinforce or correct the perception of the library in the community, there's a disposition that people have. They are not actively listening at that point. They are wired to listen in a certain set of ways. How users and potential supporters and true supporters interact with your messaging is very different. And understanding how somebody, based on their proximity to the library, their utilization of the library, their familiarity with the library, which you will remember from a moment ago, is a transformational force in the world. Perhaps they've had that experience as a user. Perhaps they've seen it happen to somebody else. Perhaps it happened in their youth or childhood. But the proximity to the library and a proximity to their own need set is essentially what drives their ability to listen to the communications, the messaging, the positioning, even the validators that you're bringing to this conversation. Users interact with your messaging fundamentally at what's called a point of need or a point of want. They need a service, they want a product. They are interested in this not as patrons of the library, which is a very noble name for them. They're consumers of the stuff that you got. They might be consumers of transformational stuff that you've got, transformational activity that you're doing, but they either have a need that motivates them to use the library or a want that motivates them to use the library. There's nothing wrong with that at all. All of that need and want around the user conversation needs to be enabled with the lowest barriers possible for them to understand how to get the thing that they want. Where do they get the thing that they want? When can they get the thing that they want? How do they get the thing that they want? And who do they get it from? All of those things are true units of marketing about what's happening tomorrow at the library. But a potential supporter and a true supporter, and I'm using the word true here in a little bit of an experimental vocabulary sort of way. There's potential supporters and supporters, but I think that we need a modifier for both. There's potential supporters who might, even say that they love you, but really don't. You have true supporters, folks who are right in the center of the bullseye with you. Potential supporters interact with your messaging at a different place than users do. Potential supporters interact with messaging around their interests or a point of change in their lives. The point of interest is, oh, that's intriguing. What are they doing at the library? I did not know that they were doing X, Y, or Z activity, event. I didn't know that they had those kinds of things for people. Yes, maybe some of them will become users. Oh, yeah, I want that too. That's kind of interesting. I could use that. But most of them are not going to become users immediately. They're not going to change their lifestyle. They are potentially going to appreciate what you're offering in some sort of a way that it delights their imagination. It sparks something in them. It motivates them in some significant way. And then there is an inflection point where they make a move from being either rationally ignorant about what you're talking about, or somewhat disinterested or unaware, into some point of awareness. There's an inflection that happens. There's a change that occurs, and they interact with your messaging in a way that is activates their mind or their heart or their gut. You've made them make a decision to pay more attention. True supporters interact with messaging in an entirely different way, and I would suggest a deeper way. They interact with your messaging and the marketing that you're doing based on a point of view or point of action, meaning that, do they have a identity? Do they have a perspective? Do they have that shared mission, vision, and values with you? And they're interacting with your messaging about what the library does, who the librarians are, with that particular point of view. And that particular point of view is um, arrived at through a lot of exposure, either personal exposure as perhaps a user who's had some experience of what you're doing in a transformational way, or just the utility of it all, or they've seen it happen in other people's lives, or maybe in their own youth or childhood something happened, and over time they've come to understand through receiving your messaging, through hearing from other social proofs, from it being in a kind of one-sided-ish dialogue with you that says that the library's activities align with the viewpoint that they have about either compassion or pride, about how we should live in society, about who we should be. That point of action also is something that true supporters are motivated to do something based on the messaging that you're sending. And a true supporter is motivated to do something based on, they're motivated into some sort of an action. And I'll get to this in a few minutes. That's based on, well, we have to tell them what to do. They're not going to make it up themselves because they're not inside the library. They're supporters. They're external to the library, but they are motivated by, again, compassion or pride, or on hope or even concern, to do something about the messaging, based on the messaging that you provided to them. How does that play out? Again, the point of view, the motivation of action, even the dawning realization on the part of a potential supporter who becomes a true supporter. People interact with your messaging based on its relevance to them. And I'm not talking about users. Users, again, are point of need, point of want. I'm talking about that emotional, that philosophical, that political buy-in that happens when somebody is moving from unaware to aware, from aware into action of some sort or another. The intersection points, the relevance points to your messaging are based on a couple of different vectors. And it is important for us in a theoretical way, before we get into the practical side of this presentation, to understand that identity and values drive a lot of decision making about supporters. I am the type of person who believes that we should be taking care of our neighbors. I'm the type of person who has a political philosophy that says we should be using a small amount of smart tax money to support the common good. Yes, there's times where I have some self-interest in this because I would like to live in a place that isn't some sort of Hobbesian, Leviathan. But identity and values drive the reasons that I'm participating in something that's bigger than me. I have a concern for a population. We call that compassion. I have an interest in my community. We call that pride. These are all psychoactive terminology that's important for us to utilize from a perspective in our marketing and our public relations work. Because if the goals that we have for our PR and the right stories that we want to tell will help us get to the right budget, the right authority to act, the right partnerships, and the right relationships, these are all important places for us to understand that what we're doing is not just relating something. We are trying to make the library much more relatable in the process. The success or failure frame is a component of that. Do we need more resources, the proper resources, so that we can produce change in the world? If we don't have those resources, if we don't have the authority to act, it means that we cannot or won't fulfill our shared mission, our common vision, and our aligned values. All right, let me take a deep breath and transition from some fairly heady philosophical stuff around marketing and PR to some more practical stuff, I hope. And it's not to suggest that any of what I talked about is somehow or another dismissible. All of it needs to be baked into what we're doing in terms of competent communications techniques. Again, we're trying to write the right story. We're trying to tell the right story, and good writing like that is good writing. So let's talk about that from a competency perspective. People always ask me, John, should I be doing a newsletter? John, should I be doing emails? If in a marketing to build use perspective, a marketing to build support perspective, in a PR kind of framework, I would like to suggest that the first rule of better stories, of better storytelling, of telling the right story, is to understand that differentiating our audiences is based in respect for the individuals we're talking to. Not just the convenience of trying to help potential users become better users, but in the depth of the fact that identification of supporters is based on a moral compass. So, some respect that we have for them is to suggest that, well, there are times when a newsletter is okay. If you need that general purpose tool that's really just looking to tell everybody everything and it's looking to share a lot of information to a lot of people on a regular basis, you've gotten some part of the way there if you can bring in some of these proper techniques. But effective email communications are designed to tell interested people things that are interesting to them. And I say that by reading it off the screen. I say that because if we are looking at this from a building use perspective, sure, I'm interested in at a point I need, a point I want. But if I'm looking at it from a building support perspective and either reinforcing or correcting the perception of the library and the librarians in the community, what people are interested in is that pride, that compassion, that success or that failure. They're interested in those systems and the approaches to how do we relate to our vision, mission, and values. And I don't know if you can necessarily do that properly with a newsletter that's only basically a community calendar. There's times where you have to put the community calendar out. I'm not suggesting you don't. But if that is the extent of your messaging, we need to reconsider the amount of activity. 5 targeted, segmented emails over the same time period beats a regular newsletter hands down by an order of magnitude. Engagement will always be low, even amongst supporters. Engagement will always be low. Unfortunately, in fact, 20% is a very high level of engagement. You might even have that 3 to 5% rate. And I'm not going to suggest that you're doing anything wrong by doing it, though we can work on improving it. A single audience email, whether it's about families and kids or new books and programming, entertainment that goes on in your community, the single audience email is extremely important compared to a general purpose newsletter because, again, for users, it has your point of need, point of want. But for folks who are interested but not necessarily engaged in that need or want as a user, there's a relevance to those folks, and they've self-identified. We have to provide, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, ways for people to self-identify properly as being interested in these topics. But what they're interested in is not necessarily from a self-interested perspective. It might be based on the compassion that they have for those kids, those people looking for work. It might be based on the pride that they have in the community being an interesting and thriving and prosperous place to live. When you're looking at emails, you're going to say to me, John, I'm concerned that we won't be able to hit people with a diversified message. You won't. Not in the email. What you need to be able to do is coordinate components of your website as launching points for other engagements on different topics. So the email is a single audience, single purpose kind of communications campaign that then refers people back to the web for additional information, for cross-pollination. It doesn't turn into a newsletter. It describes for that particular segment what is both relevant to them as a potential user, as well as relevant to them as a potential or actual supporter. There are nice techniques, and I'm going to leave this here with you to do some additional work and to also check in with my colleague Patrick Sweeney's piece on writing more for email and for advocacy work on A/B testing, where you can help you can help people discover the point of relevance for that particular email communication based on the subject lines, the urgency that you're putting into the email, and the differentiation of the asks. And I'll get to that in 1 second as well. We want to be able to help people who are users find the stuff that they want or the things that they want to do. But the people who are supporters, we want to help them. Again, they're not going to come in and use the thing. They don't need it. What do we want them to do? What do we want them to do with the communications that you're sending out is not simply have a warm glow. We want them to at least put in their ability to share. We want to convert somebody who's a supporter from being a passive supporter into an active part of our social proofs matrix. We want them to become the external validator, that they can be the friend, they can be the crowd, they can be the user themselves. We need to produce in our marketing actionable moments where people can share. And there are techniques within Twitter and Facebook. There are techniques within emails that make it easy to do that. Click to tweet is one of these tools. You can basically set up a one-point click that allows people to share. To retweet something that you've already written. The Meta sharing tools, formerly Facebook, but Meta is now Facebook and Instagram, of course. Those sharing tools are robust. And we have to include instructions in our emails and on our websites about how it is easy to share the information that you're providing. Like follows like. People who are aligned around values tend to be birds of a feather. On social media, the social graph looks a lot like, in a negative way, an echo chamber. We talk about political echo chambers. How people who are progressives only talk to progressives, conservatives only talk to conservatives. People with a particular love for a particular sports team, for example, only hang out with those other sports fans. Absolutely. The social characteristics, the social graph, is something that we, yes, in some of our programming around civic engagement, might want to obviate. But understanding that our marketing goes better when it's differentiated for the reader, for the viewer, and giving them ways to share it with other well-minded, other in their heart, how are they disposed? Other people who've got a similar kind of compassion or pride, a similar interest. Having the sharing capabilities for non-users, for potential supporters, for actual true supporters, is the most fundamental component of any writing project that you're going to undertake. What I don't want you to do is spend a lot of time trying to game the SEO or keyword systems. The library as a keyword or SEO organization, trying to write for the web in a way that makes you discoverable based on search engine optimization or some other algorithmic approach is darn near impossible. I'm not suggesting that you couldn't, but the amount of effort. The reason being that the library as a destination on the web is both pointed to so frequently and points to so many different things so frequently that we are in sort of a smudgy area of the internet. Our expertise is both a mile wide and an inch deep. And as a result, We need to use different tools to be discoverable when it comes to our position on the internet. I would highly recommend folks not trying to take any additional classes on SEO optimization, on AdWords optimization, on keyword optimization. I would highly recommend that you call one of our good friends over here at Koios. Koios does every library's AdWords. They support dozens and dozens and dozens of libraries. In fact, a couple of whole statewide initiatives on helping connect library nonprofits, your friends groups and your foundations, with the Google AdWord grant or Bing now also. And it's surprising to me how much traffic we actually get from Bing search optimization in their grant program here at every library. There's $10,000 to $20,000 worth of equivalent advertising on AdWords, on Google and Bing together, 10,000 individually. Folks, anything that you want to try and do organically, the system isn't really set up to do that when you're talking about a library. This jumps over all of the problems that you have for search. It can also be used to point to your collections as well as your programs and your expertise, but your collections in particular, in order to make them more discoverable. And I am doing a little bit of a commercial here for Peter and the team at Koios. They do great work. They are supporting in a very ethical way the chance for folks to put that Google ad and that Bing AdWord support to work to the maximum. All right, let's talk more a little about PR and media. I'm not interested in awareness building. That is a component, but it is not the goal here. Awareness by itself doesn't pay the bills. It is the engagement on the part of different components of the media landscape in your local community. I'm talking small town Utah. I'm talking big city Utah. I'm talking anywhere that you're going to go after this job, and you're going to be like, wow, that guy John, he knew what he was talking about now that I moved over to Kansas. Let's talk about media and PR for a minute. We need to differentiate in our planning process here. Who is writing about what? The who is writing about what matters a great deal, whether you're in a small town with a newspaper, a small town with no newspaper, and you get the newspaper from the next town over, or a bigger place with a couple of different media outlets. The idea that there are different types of reporters still exists in society. There are reporters who cover multiple beats, I'll give you that. But there's a big difference between somebody who's reporting on government and education and civic and social issues from each other. There are also who's writing about what, where they might simply be interested in the calendar and the social activities. I understand that. And yet that media outlet is very interested not only in prospective activities, what's happening tomorrow, but retrospectively, what did we do in the last year? What did we do in the last 6 months? What did we do for this particular population? Here is a review of how we put a small amount of smart tax money to work. Even calendars, rather than reporters, are interested in writing those kinds of stories. I need us to think about the difference between a reporter and an editor, a reporter and an opinion writer, and a reporter and a columnist as well. Each of those different types of writers have different dispositions they have different dispositions, and they will interact with your content, your mission, your vision, and values, the right story that you're looking to tell, in very different ways. Editors are approaching it from the perspective of how does this fit into the rest of the coverage that we're trying to engineer, not just for this particular issue, but for the cadence across weeks and even months. Opinion writers are looking to maximize their opportunity to talk about something that they may or may not know very much about, but in a context that either elicits a response or engenders a set of feelings. And the library these days sure has that ability. And the columnists, those folks who are looking to talk on a particular topic, sometimes it is about education or government or civic and social issues, but not with the reporter's dispassionate eye, but with an engaged bias. Sounds negative here, but a point of view. It's not just the writers, though. In many parts of Utah, you have a tremendous advantage over suburban Chicago, where I live. And with many libraries around the country that we work with, in Utah, you have something that is kind of the holy grail of communications and PR. Now, while the newspapers might not necessarily be as robust, your radio market and your TV markets tend to be a lot easier to work with. And maybe you don't feel like that from where you're sitting today, but let me tell you, when the Nielsen market is well defined, not that busy, and they're looking for content, you've got yourself a heck of an opportunity. And it's the producers rather than the reporters that I want you to be focusing on. In terms of right storytelling, again, what's the perspective of that news program? Is it conservative? Is it progressive? Is it a just a talking heads thing? Are they looking for segments that have different lifestyle components or human interest? Or is it really simply looking to present a set of facts? Is the radio or the TV environment there a talk environment where they are looking to bring on guests who either have something interesting, compelling, funny, expert to talk about? Or does your radio and TV allow for different sorts of feature opportunities? None of these are something I would enter into blithely, mind you. All of them have the potential to help you carry your goals forward about either maintaining or changing the perception of the library. Likewise, there's a type of radio and a type of TV that are both essentially closed circuit when it comes to streaming services. They have very similar kinds of characteristics, though. You have a streaming service that's a news service. You have a streaming service that is a featured kind of story. You have a streaming service on radio and TV that features more about talk. The podcast side of it, and I'm lumping blogs together with podcasts because blog writers are not necessarily reporters, they're more like producers. And podcasts certainly are driven more by producer priorities than even necessarily the personality producer priorities rather than the talk personality. The opportunity here might not be in your particular neck of the woods. It might be a national publication. It might be a particular kind of niche podcast, but the chance to be in an environment where you can have content that's produced, content around literary issues or lifestyle. You got a lot to talk about parenting and families. In your part of Utah, you have a lot to talk about in terms of travel and tourism as well. The chance to be able to create content in this kind of a space that isn't necessarily for the home consumption directly, but is itself a mark of your competency because somebody from out of town wanted to talk to you. Somebody from outside of your immediate zone thought that you are an expert. The validation that happens when you are on TV, it's great fun. Or you're on the radio, it's pretty neat. But when you're in publications that are from someplace other than your own backyard and on podcasts that are from someplace other than your own local personalities, these are valuable opportunities. When you make a pitch, because you're going to pitch these people, part of your media training today here is to think through, okay, what do I want to talk about? We're going to get to that a little bit more. But the agnostics around this are when you make a pitch to a reporter, to an editor, to an opinion writer, to a columnist, when you make a pitch to a producer on a radio or a TV segment, a podcast producer, a blog, with family, parenting, lifestyle, travel blog, you always start with a greeting that's truly personal, meaning that you've done your research. You know enough about that writer or that producer or their show at least to describe how to make a hello that is legitimate. To have a subject line that catches the eye is very important, of course, because the bigger the outlet, the more activity that they get. Anyone who's subscribing to some PR newswire is getting inundated with stuff. The eye-catching subject line, there are certain principles about how to write eye-catching subject lines in terms of the urgency and the efficacy that we'll get to, but the relevant material in the body copy. Why should they care? Why should their audience be interested? Again, you're not really looking in this kind of a case to build use. They're not interested in, especially for something that might be broad-based like radio or a newspaper or a podcast, or a blog that's even from out of town, that they're not going to be users. What are they interested in? Is fundamentally about a story that is, in some way, shape, or form, attached to that transformational agenda for libraries, the transformational work that librarians and library workers do. The human interest components of it, the power and the impact around it. Now we're going to get into a few ideas for what that looks like in the last segment here. But why they're interested is not necessarily buy now. It is that point of view that says this is how the library is taking care of, is supporting, is helping to transform our communities. The press release is attached. So when you make your pitch, it's a personal greeting subject line that's got some interest to it, the body copy that talks about why they should be interested, what are the key points to your story, why do they need to act on it, where can they get more information, and then you put the whole thing together as the press release that you attach to the body. Television and radio needs to hear from you about a week out. They're always looking to do things a little bit faster. There's a lot more content that needs to be done, especially on a news talk or feature segment where there's a lot of time to fill. Newspapers, sometimes you can make your pitch up to 2-3 weeks ahead of time. It's nice to do that, especially if you're working with a reporter and there's a date certain event coming up. If you're working with an editor, so they have to make assignments. If you're working with an opinion maker or a columnist, putting it into the regular cadence because they're writing ahead of time. And magazines and podcasts in particular, the blogs, when I say magazines, blogs too, the pitch needs to be coming out several months in advance because they are writing and producing for publication at a schedule that is not slower in a negative way, but substantially different than just-in-time media like radio and TV. What happens when they respond to your pitch? Okay, great. You have put out something. Again, I'm agnostic about what the topic is right now, but you've put out something that is relevant and interesting across a couple of support vectors about compassion or pride, about something that's interesting or thriving or prosperous. When they say yes to you, as either they're incorporating your expertise into something that they're writing, they're featuring you, they're utilizing your resources because of your expertise. You always want to be able to ask them what they want to talk about. You made a pitch to them, it may or may not have landed 100%. It may be tangential to what they want to talk about. Great. Let's still see if it maps to your goals. If it does, wonderful. If it does not, it's okay to demur. You want to prepare what your answers are to what they want to discuss ahead of time. You might even want to practice it. But it's important to have in your own head an opportunity for an interview, whether it's a newspaper interview, a blog interview, a podcast interview, a TV or radio interview, to have this expertise at the tip of your tongue. You also want to take something that might feel presumptive, but you want to take this presumptive step and to send them the messaging that you want to convey. There have been numerous times where I've been on a radio program or I've been on a podcast where the individual who is interviewing me has not been properly prepped by their producer. And it is very beneficial for me to have sent ahead of time to the producer what I would like to have the host ask me about. You always want to say thank you. I cannot stress how important this is. If you want to get somebody calling you back for another story later, if you want to be in that media slipstream frequently, simple kindnesses like saying thank you matter a great deal. Likewise, the simple kindness of tagging someone and their publication on social media when you're sharing it, to be able to say thanks at writer name from at publication for being a wonderful host and for helping to share the library's compelling and interesting story about transformational work that we're doing. Click here to read more. The @ sign there is part of the social lubricant of society. You've got to do it. Likewise, be ready to refer. You are not a sole source. In many situations, you are potentially one component of a much larger story, and the writers, whether they're reporting on government, they're reporting on civics, they're reporting on education, whether the producers, depending on if they have a lifestyle piece or they have a current events piece that they're doing, they need help, and you have something that they don't have, which is a tremendous amount of information about people who use the services that you're trying to describe or care about the issues that you're espousing. And also, if you're going to be in this business of trying to bring about good conversations in this PR space, and to either reinforce or to correct the perception of the library, you need to be able to be prepared to turn around the when they call, you need to pick up the phone. When they ask you for a comment, you have to be prepared to give a thoughtful engagement as quickly as you can. Making yourself available one time, being thoughtful and thank yous and doing the right kind of tagging, it builds on itself over time. I would like to put out that perhaps part of your PR and media engagement efforts might also include the concept of a press conference from time to time. I know that if you're in a small town right now, you're saying to yourself, John, we have one newspaper and 2 radio stations, and once in a while the TV comes this way, and that's great. How do you get them out more? How do you bring them to your place? How do you make sure that you can host them in your kind of context? The idea that your competency, that your expertise, that your efficacy is on display when you're being interviewed for an article, when you're placing your own content, but a press conference about a particularly germane subject. And I would suggest that you have some. Whenever you have a prominent individual coming to your community for a author event or for a special civic event, when you have something as important to announce as your new strategic plan or a big community survey, when you are one of many groups getting together to do something, say, like summer reading, where it cuts across the schools and the Boys and Girls Clubs and a couple of the faith-based community groups and your library, and you want to make sure that you are seen in that kind of a context with those partners. And then there are occasions where something big is happening either in Utah or around the country, and you would like to be in a position to comment on it, either solo or in partnership. These are all valid activities, and a press conference, especially hosted at the library or hosted at the city, is a really powerful way to establish your bona fides. All right, speaking of bona fides, who talks for the library in these agnostic conversations around telling the right story? And I got to be honest with you, sometimes our job titles do not immediately confer competency as being a spokesperson. Who is the right person to tell your story and to tell the right story? A good spokesperson might vary from story to story, but not generally speaking. You tend to want to have a spokesperson who is the one who's going to be with the reporter, with the producer, with the host. You want the spokesperson to be the one that, when you produce your own content, is the one that is contacted for further information. The expertise of the spokesperson matters a great deal because they have to be able to think on their feet. Often it's the director, often it's the board president, but frequently, and I see this from here and there, it's neither one of those folks because they don't like it, they're not good at it, they don't want it. So a subject specialist can be a very effective spokesperson for the library in these kinds of public relations kinds of contexts. The ability of your potential spokesperson, have they gone through media training? And it's more than just this little webinar that I'm doing today. Do they have an understanding of the issues that is broader than the immediate subject area? Because if they're called on for further follow up, likewise, are they comfortable in front of a camera, on a Zoom call, in front of a mic? And do they have that certain sort of interpersonal relatability that makes a conversation be warm, or at least that person knows what she or he is really talking about. Who is the expert at your library? And this is not just a theoretical thing. If your PR agenda, your public relations agenda, your goals of your public relations campaign, that's not about just building users, but about building support, has goals attached to your perception in the community, your funding, your relationships with your elected officials or your donors. What kind of partnerships are you engaged in? What tables are you at? The expert in your library might not necessarily be based on job title. It might be based on a different set of competencies. Your spokesperson might be more about finances or governance, or about, I mean, something as interesting as your special collections, or as intriguing as new technology, or as diverse as the different kinds of genres that your library is good at, or somebody who's a real wonk with things like search and databases. I mean, there are a number of reasons. Youth and Children's Services, of course. There's a number of reasons to have different spokespeople, or appropriate spokespeople, when a particular type of message is looking to be advanced. All right, where are we at? Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead one. Let me go back. There's another type of competency that is about institutional reputation. The spokesperson, of course, is institutional reputation. It's conferred by the individual who's giving those kinds of stories. But there's one other component of a public relations campaign that I think is important to spend a little bit of time thinking through. And it is a social proof of sorts. But that is when your library is either applying for or has received some sort of an award. It could be an award around staff as leaders, the organization as being effective or efficient or even enterprising, about the awards that happen through either a solo activity that the library has or as a partnership activity, and that the recognitions that are inside or outside of our industry and your location in Utah. And I'm saying this very specifically because it is fascinating to see what happens when the library is recognized as an entrepreneurial center rather than as a library. When the library is recognized as a literacy center rather than a library. When the staff is recognized as innovative small business or nonprofit leader rather than a library leader. And when you're recognized from outside of the immediate neighborhood, we're all really good in our own backyard, but we look a lot better when somebody who isn't, in our hometown says to our hometown that the hometown kid has done good. I would highly encourage you, as you're thinking through a PR and a marketing campaign that's around building support and around either reinforcing or correcting the image of the library in your community, to utilize awards in that sort of deliberate way. It is a component of your image. It is a component of your marketing communications, and it establishes or extends your legitimacy. All right, let me go down a crisis communications rabbit hole for a minute. This is not to suggest this is an exhaustive list, but when it comes to communications, the right story for a crisis is the most important story for you to tell. If something has happened in the community, and I want to think that through with you in another slide or so, it either happened in the community or to the library. It is very important to follow these first five principles around telling the truth. Number one, and treating everyone in this context with respect is a component of this as well. You will only succeed in either mitigating or weathering a crisis if you are able to do the truth telling and doing it in a way that is truly humbly respectful. Even if you have done something, especially if you've done something that is incorrect or in some way, shape, or form wrong, especially if you've been wronged yourselves. Number two, if you don't know the answer to a question in a crisis environment, please say so. If you start making stuff up, you're going to trip over your own 2 feet. Same goes for number three, which is about exaggerations or information that isn't backed up by evidence, especially if you're in a situation where you feel like you are being attacked or in some ways put upon or being backed into a corner. Those two principles are a very important components of communications during a crisis. The fourth being don't state opinions as facts or make accusations or charges against someone or some other group that are not provable. If they are provable, though, the transitive property here says that you should definitely make those kinds of conversations that are fact based because it means that you're telling the truth. And if there's a charge back that is necessary, that's provable, again, it is a component of truth telling to be able to talk about facts and about the state of play. But you will be in trouble worse if you are looking at this from an opinion based rather than a fact based conversation. And in any crisis communications environment, what you are prepared to do should be the limit of what you commit to do publicly. What you're prepared to actually do in terms of either mitigating the crisis, addressing a shortfall, changing a behavior, anything that is adaptive to or responsive to the origin of the crisis has to be authentic. And if you don't, and I'm sorry, you should not commit to doing something that you, meaning that your leadership team, your staff team, your board, you yourself as a leader, if you're not prepared to actually do it, it should never be something that you put out as a promise. When we are looking at crisis communications, it's very important for us to spend time looking at how to triage it. Where is the immediate problem? Is the error unfortunate that was made by the library but has bigger consequences? Or have you been messaging in a way that was misinterpreted or misrepresented? Or is the crisis coming from a place where people out in the community, a small group, a faction, maybe even a simple majority, are distrustful of you, your institution? Um, it might be a sudden shocking moment. It might be something that's developed over time. But the idea that because they dislike or distrust you, everything that you're saying is a betrayal of a set of principles. Some crises are manufactured on the part of the individual or the group that's trying to advance it because of a political or a philosophical or even moral issue. And the library is seen as being disconnected from the legitimate rest of the community because of the library's political, philosophical, or moral stance. And there are times when, well, is it a communications problem that caused this crisis, or are you under some sort of a political threat or attack? I want to, whenever you're dealing with a crisis communications framework, it's very important to understand the origin of it because you cannot address a solution unless you understand where it's coming from in its truth. There's a very different set of responses between the first bullet point here about an unfortunate error that you've made and a political problem that's being foisted upon you, or a philosophical disconnect, or a moral disconnect. Crisis mitigation has certain principles to it as well. Once we understand the source of it, and we have the core philosophy of how we address it. Trying to talk with the members of the group that is angry with you or opposes you is, as we know from any good challenge policy that any library has. And challenges are not crises. Challenges are challenges. What happens after the challenge sometimes is where crises develop. But talking to folks when they are in anger and That takes a great deal of strength. It takes the right kind of spokesperson as well. Being flexible in a mitigation approach without betraying what you believe in or what you're attempting to do in the community. This is where the moral compass and the moral certitude conversation come together. Taking responsibility when it is appropriate and relevant, and apologizing is when it's legitimately your fault. As a crisis mitigation tool, is a authentic thing to potentially do. And in any crisis mitigation environment, talking through again and again the kind of framework that you want to present to the world in order to either reinforce your position or correct the perception that people have in ways that they're likely to hear it. Who speaks at that point? The spokesperson. And again, I asked you earlier to think about, who's got those kind of competencies for different topics ahead of time. If you are in a crisis environment, it might be based on job title. It might be based on domains of expertise. But the library spokesperson in a crisis is the one who's empowered and known. They're empowered and known both to the media as well as to the staff and to the board as the legitimate spokesperson. It's amazing what happens when folks on the front lines or folks at the board table understand that they don't have to have something prepared. They can make a referral to the spokesperson. The library has to speak for itself and about itself during any kind of crisis. We talked about social proofs several times. This is not a time for relying on somebody else to show up and vouch for you. Third parties in a crisis are validators, endorsers. They are not your spokesperson. They are not you. By definition, they are all external to the library. The only legitimate voice for the library is of the library and about the library. We have to be willing to speak in an active voice. Once we go through the crisis protocols to see whether or not the origin of it is coming from a place we understand, and if our approach to it has those characteristics around integrity, around truthfulness, around respect, but we have to be the ones who are speaking on our own behalf. Is there a protocol within the library for moving requests for information and publication of information? If there's not, we have to be prepared to either make one up fairly quickly or to have that conversation happen among senior leadership ahead of time, because making it up as you go along is not a very comfortable thing to do during a real crisis. And whenever the library in a crisis communications conversation is making a statement, it has to be published across all your different channels. We cannot assume that folks are going to see your Twitter feed or your website. It has to be done in anything that you're trying to either affirm or correct, anything that you're trying to share as factual, anything that you're trying to do that is based on the integrity of the library. It has to be widely disseminated and properly disseminated across all your channels. Otherwise, the rumor mill and the gossip chain is going to have a vacuum to fill. You might also want to consider in a crisis environment, not just responding on blog posts and on open letters or on statements, but actually hosting a press conference or a media availability in order to give more information than what's available in a press release or a blog post. Press conferences being interactive require a tremendous amount of preparation. Again, going back to the spokesperson as being an expert, being competent, being empowered. But with press conferences, you can do a lot to reset the agenda or establish a new agenda. There's a difference between resetting and establishing that I'm not exactly sure what that means right this second. But one way or another, if you can control based on the convening that you're doing with this press conference, if you can help set that record straight, it is a powerful technique in crisis response. All right, let me get off of crises though. Let me get back to some of the core competencies of telling the right story. the thing that we need to be working towards preparing. And again, this is a webinar that is for general consumption, your particular public relations goals, your particular support building matrix, your particular expertise, as it were, are all different. Everybody on this webinar today, everybody who's listening here has got a little different perspective, and I hope the agnostic nature of what I've been describing can be brought into something particular and peculiar for your library. And the way I'd suggest starting to boil it all down to sugar is with the utilization of a media kit for your library. Media kits are important because it makes it easier for the people you want to talk to, whether it's journalists or editors or producers, to understand what topics you're driving as your key topics. What are your key issues? Because you're setting the entire tone in the media kit. It's current. You want to update it every 6, 9, 12 months for sure. Your activities, your strategic priorities, any kind of staff or board changes, the awards and recognition conversation that we had earlier, some samples of ways that you've been covered in the press previously, some of those social proofs from either experts or the crowd, from friends, from experts, crowds, friends. Forgive me, folks. I'm short 2 social proofs. I'm gonna have to go back in the webinar myself and remember what they are. But the testimonials. Oh, and also please, in the media kit, talk about your either the grants that you've received and the donations that have come in, or your eligibility for that. It's not just the media that looks at your media kit. It's folks who are interested in you for a broad variety of topics. The elements of your media kit, you want to have a brief history of the library, who you are, where you came from, when did you get started, when was the most recent interesting big thing that happened. You want biographies of your key staff and your boards, and in small libraries, that might be everybody, and that's awesome, because then you get to have your photograph in the media kit. Some mentions that have happened recently, photos from your library events as well. It's nice to have kind of a face to the name when it comes to putting those kinds of photos into your media kit. Any of your recent milestones, including your grants and donations, again, your statistics around either growth or decline in those stories that you want to tell that highlight some of your ability to deliver services across a compassion or a pride matrix. And then the ways to find you on the web, on social, how to get in touch with you. This should be set up as a PDF, not a Word doc. It needs to be something that's static that you control the content of, but you can design it in everything from Word to Canva, etc. You want it highlighted on a dedicated page on your website, alongside a longer list of stories and more recent press if you have them. And a nice thing to do in this kind of a context is also to include your official logo so that it can be downloaded and used. You want to put the permissions up about how it can be used and cited, as well as photos of the library. Anything that's got photo releases attached to it, it makes it very easy when there's press coverage happening of you. They don't have to go scrounging around. It's another reason to put photographs of key staff and board members in that media kit as well. All right, I'm going to wrap this up to you today with a little bit of a reflection on what the right story is in this marketing to build support, in this PR goal setting kind of context. And again, it comes down to applying some principles that I've talked about agnostically through this webinar, but hopefully we can localize it now for you in some material ways, and the chance to be able to interact about this. If you're watching this webinar in March, we'll have a call-in, a coaching call at the end of March. Otherwise, every library is here based on our relationship with the Utah State Library to do these kinds of one-on-one conversations on an ongoing basis. But what is your right story in this kind of a context? Well, the right story is the true story of your library, where you speak for yourself as the expert in the work that you're doing. The social proofs, those third parties, as endorsers or validators, or even participants who are an example of what you did, are third party. They're not of you and in you. You have to speak for yourself, and you need to describe in your storytelling not just the good stuff. In order to motivate a supporter, you have to do more than just describe the good stuff. You got to talk about what happens if you cannot do the work or don't do the work. You have to describe the shortfalls that are either going to persist or deepen if you're not able to do the work. It's an extraordinary motivator for people who have a shared vision for your community, the same as you do, who have a common mission for the betterment of society, who have a value system that really looks to you as being an enactor of how they hope the world will actually be. The right story is your story. Anything that I'm talking about here, when it comes to PR, to writing, to even crisis response, starts on your own. Though I shared some techniques about getting into press, talking to journalists, talking to podcasts, etc. But really, we need to start at home. Your own website, your own social media. My biggest suggestion to you is considering your own public relations goals and this opportunity to build support rather than just use, is to write one news story a week for me that talks about how you fulfill your vision or your mission or your values, and not just inviting people to come to a program next Tuesday. It has to be about, it isn't about getting someone to come out to something. That it's about how did you put a small amount of smart tax money, a small amount of compassionate donor money, a small amount of strategic resources, some good staff to work. How did you put it all to work? How did you move that hope that you have, that concern, off the plate, and then put a little bit of money behind it. Put a little money behind the post on social media, because you've got something there that's more important than 15 more kids coming to story time. You have a description of how story time is early language literacy, is letter shapes and numbers, is helping a kid, learn to read so they can read to learn. When you put that one story up in the next week or so about your vision, your mission, and your values, what you did yesterday, and you start advertising it for me, I need you to also add one more component to it, which is a call to action of some sort, to the people who read it. Perhaps they're users and they're like, oh, I should go to the next one. It's great. But what I'm really talking about here is the potential supporters and the true supporters. Those people we talked about a little while ago, where they're either looking at you from their point of view or in a point of inflection where they want to change. They want to change from being inactive to active. Or if they're a true supporter, how you're reinforcing their worldview as well. Asking people who like the story to do something specific is an unusual thing, but it's a key element of your marketing communications. It should be moving forward. Users, what can people do when you ask them? What are you asking people to do? What can they do? Well, yes, users can use the thing. They can use the place. They can come and do stuff. But potential supporters and current supporters need to be invited to become more involved. They are willing to, if we make it a low barrier opportunity for them to participate and put some of their personal budget to work, because they agree with you. They agree that you're doing something that's important in the community. It's transformational. It aligns with their mission, vision, values. Personally, they would like to put their time or their money or their good name to work, which means that, hey, here's a great story about story time. We helped 15 kids. We helped 50 kids. We helped 50 families, and we should be able to help 100, but we need your help. We need volunteers. Can you come and support as a volunteer? We need funding. Can you make a donation so that that we don't have a summer gap in our story times? We need you to help share the good news, the good word about what we're doing here at the library. We've made it easy for you to do that on social media. Here's some clickable buttons. We have to make it easy for folks to participate in our relationship building, which is public relations fundamentally. Make it easy for them to spend what they want to spend on identifying with your mission, your vision, and your values. Every good story that you want to produce is the right story, and that's not just a trick, for the title of this webinar. Every one of these stories potentially here, just as little prompts for you. I know I just told you write a good story, write a next story. Well, here's 5 that you can choose from. How about your computers? Your computers at your library, you might have enough of them, you might not have enough of them, but do people know that they're a place that people support their small businesses? Do people know that they've got a side hustle? There are people who are selling stuff on Etsy and eBay. That's story time around first language learning. I've already mentioned that. A story about outreach to the homebound. I mean, I'm not homebound personally. I don't need this, but my goodness, what you're doing at the library fulfills my. It lines up morally with how I think we should be living in community. When we brought them the books, their eyes lit up. You could tell another story about economic development that's not about individuals, but about the retail and livability of your community. Just tell an interesting story about how when people leave their homes every day, they come to the library to do stuff at the library, and then they go shopping. These are not prosaic stories. These are certainly transformational if we can position them properly. It's nice to be the town art gallery as well as the town library, or the town performance center, or the town gathering space. These are all stories that could be the right story for your library, and none of them are about coming and using it particularly yourself. It's about how you're enacting, and therefore you're either reinforcing the perception that you're enacting it correctly, or you're correcting it. There's a lot of hidden stories in the right storytelling that you could be doing as well. And these are all potentially fodder for outreach to media, to podcasts, to magazines, to opinion setters. You have new hires coming in, you have new board members, you get yourself a nice little story. There's a new study that comes out from ALA or PLA or Urban Libraries or ARSL or goodness gracious, every library institute, and that you want to put a local perspective on it or a lens on it. There are milestones that happen all the time, and I'm not talking about holidays or the rhythm of the library year, but you've got some interesting things happening in your collections or your activities, and you can declare different sorts of holidays, different sorts of milestones yourself. We had 750 or 750,000 circulations, whatever it may be. The chance to compare and contrast your library with other libraries. It's not a rivalry unless you want to make it a rivalry, but to say that here in our part of Utah, as opposed to over there in another part of Utah, or clear across the country in Connecticut or Alabama or wherever. And there's an interesting story to be told, I would suggest, around your efficiencies and your ability to leverage tax money that I think is worth exploring. Also, in this day and age, I think it's very important, especially considering what we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, that it's not just the perception of the institution, but it's the perception of the people who work there that motivate decisions to support the library. What are the ethics of librarianship? Where is your group moral compass pointing? I have last slide here for you, a little bit of a commercial for every library and the stuff that we're offering to our friends and our colleagues around the country. We publish every day, at least 5, 6 times a week, a story or two about librarians and libraries, about library-shaped solutions to problems in the world, about librarian-enacted solutions to problems in the world. And we do that at medium.com/everylibrary. I'd love for you to check it out for 2 reasons. One is that you might enjoy some of the stuff. It might be a little inspirational about how you can start to publish on your own blog, your own website, your own social media, and how to craft some of those pitches to reporters and to editors and to producers and to magazines and podcasts. but also because the stories are available to you to be used through a Creative Commons license in unlimited fashion, highly adaptive fashion, for free for libraries. If you're a little stuck and you're like, John, this was a very interesting webinar, I don't know where to get started, just head over to medium.com/everylibrary and steal something. You can adapt it right away for your own uses. I'd love to see it go out there in the world with your wrapper around it. All right, team, that's me, John Kraska, Executive Director for the Every Library Institute and for Every Library. This has been the March 2023 recording for the Utah State Library on Telling the Right Story. I'm looking forward during March 2023 to see folks in person for the coaching call, for the live conversations, and anytime on the internet. You can hit me up on email. You can even give me a phone call, and we can talk about the particulars about how this looks in your library. I hope you're wildly successful at this. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me tonight or today, and be well. Bye-bye.